The Duggar family accumulated a fortune thanks to their notoriety. A vision of family, faith, and prosperity founded more on spiritual values than financial gain. The idea centers on Jim Bob Duggar, the patriarch, and his promise to support his family. He promised his sons this. Arise during their marriage, which is the most influential event in their lives. They appear to possess all material goods, having a profitable business, a home, and a beautiful wife by the age of 21. For the conservative American dream, millions of others saw it as a blessing, a direct reward for leading a devoted and submissive life. But a careful analysis of their financial situation, supported by unique insider knowledge, reveals a startling truth that breaks all the illusions. Despite having no bills at all, they owe their father a great deal. The manner in which Jim Bob traps his boys in a web of slavery and debt. There's more to this than just money. That is a story about authority and control. This is going to completely change the way you think about the Duggars, so pay attention. You've come to the right place if you're curious about the inner workings of reality TV. Turn on notifications and subscribe to Duggar 24 if you don't want to miss anything about this probe. We are going to disentangle a finely constructed web. We will also be monitoring every thread. The patriarch displayed a gold-plated cage. The pattern appears to be both aesthetically pleasant and predictable at first glance. Jim Bob is in favor of a relationship that a Duggar family son initiates. Courtship is followed by a betrothal, which is followed by a wedding. The two most significant gifts that any couple could hope for are a place to call home and the resources to sustain their growing family, and these are given to the newlyweds almost immediately after the wedding. We'll start by looking at the past. After they were married, Jim Bob moved the newlyweds into a small home in Fayetteville and had Josh, the oldest, run one of the family's used car stores. Jill and Derek Dillard lived in one of Jima's massive Fayetteville houses, a 4,000 square foot home he had bought for $1 from his mother in between their missionary travels. Then Seewald famously left Jessica the terrible mold house where Grandma Mary had lived before their wedding. They eventually completely repaired it. Joseph, John, Solomon, and David were kings. Nothing is altered. A house is equipped. There's a job offer. It almost always occurs within the broad and enigmatic network of Duggar family businesses. According to Jim Bob, the couple wants to provide their kids a strong foundation. You want to be able to bless your children so they can start a family without having to worry about debt repayment once you have invested the necessary time and energy. Free from the burden of worldwide debt. A statement like that is crucial. The Duggars believed that debt was the same as servitude. One of the basic texts in the Bible is Proverbs 22:7. The rich control the poor, and borrowers are slaves to their lenders. This teaching is also responsible for the family's credo, buy used, save the difference, and their very economical lifestyle. In the public's perspective, it also explains Jim Bob's generosity. He wants to keep his lads from becoming bank slaves and succumbing to the secular money system. What if he encourages people to owe him money rather than attempting to help them get out of debt? What if, rather than being the bank, he has just become the bank? The only employer, the only lender, the only landlord, the only one without contracts, the only one with the power to change terms at any time, and the only one that pays with blessings rather than wages. Our informants claim that this is the origin of the Duggar underground economy, a whole monetary system that functions simultaneously with the real one. There are unwritten rules, a system of obedience and allegiance that serves as currency, and a debt that is specific to this system and cannot be paid or proven. To the untrained eye, the sons appear to be independent people who manage their own households in line with their ideals. They appear to take care of their family, invest in real estate, and operate a few small enterprises. But they are only components of a bigger system that they have little control over. They live in houses that are not legally theirs, run businesses whose profits they do not personally see, and provide for their families with a stipend that was given to them by the same man they are purportedly trying to imitate. Aspiring patriarchs are not within this group. They are vassals under a feudal system, which means they work for their lord's companies, live on his property, and rely entirely on his kindness to survive. This is far from a boon. It's a gilded cage. An introduction to Dillard's writing. Long hidden beneath the brightness of reality TV and the romanticized depiction of a happy family, this system remained unknown to the general public. However, a few years ago cracks began to appear on the exterior. The main cause of the rifts that have formed is Derek Dillard, the spouse of Jill, the second oldest Duggar daughter. Derek, now a trained attorney, was the first insider to publicly challenge Jim Bob's authority and, more crucially, his control over the company's finances. His social media claims were a little startling. He claimed that Jim Bob was the sole recipient of TLC cash for a number of years, relying heavily on the kids. They were still not regarded as network employees even after they were married and had children. Derek referred to them as volunteers. Jim Bob expected them, if not asked for them. He required that they have Jim Bob's approval before doing anything, including announcing their pregnancy or taking up side employment. Instead of being a caring father, he depicted the family's television revenue, which is thought to be between $25,000 and $45,000 every episode, in an icy grip. The fact that the family's finances were a fake had never before been verified in public. The money wasn't given to those who earned it. Eventually, it made its way to the patriarch. But it was Derek's comments about the houses that were most instructive. He claimed that he and Jill lived in a mansion owned by Jim Bob, and that their living arrangement was contingent upon his approval. It seems that he was suggesting that the other siblings were in a similar situation. All of a sudden, houses appeared more like power tools than gifts. If you waited patiently in line, you were assured a spot to sleep. If you break the rules, as Derek and Jill did, that protection can be taken away. After putting the system through its paces, the Dillard case revealed its fundamental shortcomings. As they began to drift apart, Jill and Derek were under a great deal of stress. In essence, the family lost their primary source of income. Their housing was precarious. Growing up in a completely remote town with limited access to formal education and practical work experience, they were faced with the daunting prospect of beginning their lives anew. Their fight sent a dreadful message to the other siblings, especially the sons. If you decide to disobey, your family's safety is at risk. A certified public accountant's shocking disclosure. Derek Dillard's public statements fueled interest in the idea, but no one understood the true workings of the phantom economy. How exactly did it operate? To respond to it, you would need to have access to the books. Deciphering the intricate web of verbal agreements and family finances would require a professional. It seemed unachievable for a long time before this. Through a series of covert interviews, the Duggar report was able to locate the source of the missing piece of information. He will be referred to as the accountant throughout this report. The certified public accountant has over 20 years of experience in forensic accounting and small company financing. A few years ago, he worked for a spouse of one of the Duggar daughters. From now on, we'll call this son-in-law Adam. He was asked to help Adam and his wife, Jane, a Duggar daughter, with a seemingly simple issue. They wanted to know how to evaluate their own financial situation so they might qualify for a small personal loan. The accountant said that he was expecting a straightforward case when I showed up for the meeting. He anticipated seeing W-2s from TLC, salary stubs from a family business, and a deed to a home. Rather, he remembers, what he found scared him. He called it a financial black hole. The accountant claimed that they had no assets at all. There's no typical documentation like a lease, a deed, or an employment contract. Adam was employed at his father-in-law's construction company, but he didn't have a source of income, so he couldn't give it to me. Instead of calling Adam's income a salary, the family called it an allowance or draw. Jim Bob occasionally transferred or gave them cash for this arbitrary amount to cover the family's weekly expenses, such groceries and diapers. Although it was sufficient to survive, it was never sufficient to save. The amount may and often did fluctuate in unpredictable ways. Since Adam and Jane had never received a check from TLC, they declined to show the accountant any of the money they earned from the show. They were told that the money was transferred to a family account under Jim Bob's supervision in order to assist the family ministry. Then came the house. They lived in a beautiful 3-bedroom home on a few acres of property. They told the accountant it was a gift from Jane's father and that it was part of a rent-to-own agreement. However, when he requested details of the deal, none were provided. There was no contract. What is the price? I asked when he told us. They didn't know. What is the interest rate? There were none. What proportion of your monthly payment is applied to the principal? They stared at me without saying anything. It was not a rent-to-own deal. It was all just organized. Jim Bob was a member of an LLC that actually owned the house they were living in. Even though Adam hadn't seen them yet, his paycheck had already deducted the rent that Jim Bob had given them. But the most shocking discovery was what the accountant calls the family debt ledger. No formal documentation was involved. It is said that Jim Bob kept a running tally for all of his children and their partners. It was only a notion. Jim Bob has always covered all of their major costs. When he paid for their wedding, the car, the house, and even their high medical bills, he did not offer them a gift. In this invisible book, that was a tally, an obligation the son has to his father on a personal level. Due to the son's employment for the family businesses not covering the expenses, nobody was able to put food on the table. Paying down this massive and steadily growing amount of outstanding debt was the primary driver. Even their basic living expenditures were barely met by their small allowance, not to mention their actual earnings. The money that remained was being sent to Jim Bob to pay off an unspecified debt, a loan with no predetermined terms for repayment. I had to explain things to this child. The accountant was practically bankrupt from a legal and financial standpoint, he said, the memories weighing heavily on his voice. He had nothing to his name. He was unable to produce any evidence of income. In addition, he may have owing his father-in-law a six-figure handwritten debt. He wasn't employed. He had no interest in being a homeowner. They had taken him into slavery. The system was designed to be unavoidable. The only things you would have taken with you if you had attempted to escape would have been your clothing and a debt of honor that their community could use against you. Ultimately, the accountant decided he could not help them. Their credit, assets, and financial history were completely unrecognizable. They were totally enmeshed in the actual economy, but they only existed in Jim Bob's shadow economy. Here's an illustration of control theory in action. The accountant has, surprisingly, testified. It aids in a better understanding of the control system. However, would it be able to prove this? Can official documentation be used to find evidence of this illegal trade? It's right, indeed. And the evidence for that is there, in the open, as recorded in the books of business and property of Washington County, Arkansas. For a long time, the Duggar family's real estate dealings have been the subject of journalists, academics, and critics. Jim Bob is well versed in the local real estate market, having previously worked as a real estate agent. The interesting part, however, is not the number of properties. This governs their transfer and ownership. They are rarely in a son's name, at least initially. They are purchased by limited liability corporations, LLCs, and maintained in a complex network. Let's create a fictitious case study based on the real-life trend. Son X will be our subject. The first step is the acquisition. Jim Bob is able to buy decrepit or repossessed homes at a reduced price because to Duggar Properties, LLC. For instance, $40,000. His utilization of money is a defining feature of his business operations. Another degree of legal separation is added when the LLC is identified as the owner in the public record rather than Jim Bob personally. Phase 2. The manual effort and the contribution. The vows of Son X are a wedding. As a gift, Jim Bob gives them this house so they may start afresh. The two become comfortable. Fresh paint, new flooring, and kitchen remodeling are all necessary. The house has to be repaired immediately. For the next 2 years, Son X and his spouse do everything alone, often with his brother's help. Their efforts have been fruitful.